Okay, we're right to go. Well, good morning to everyone here in Australia, and good evening, or maybe it's good afternoon to those who are joining us from Peru and elsewhere in Latin America, and maybe somewhere else in the world as well. My name's David Brereton. I'm the host for this session today. Those who don't know me, I worked at the Sustainable Minerals Institute from 2001 to 2016, initially as Director of the Centre for Social Responsibility in Mining, and finally as a stint as a Deputy Director in the Institute. Now, my first and very important task this morning is to acknowledge the traditional owners and their custodianship of the land on which we meet today. And on behalf of the Sustainable Minerals Institute, I pay our respects to their ancestors and their descendants who continue cultural and spiritual connections to country. Now, I just want to take a little bit of time to introduce the session and tell you how it will run. So we're honoured to have with us today Dr. Gerardo Castillo Guzmán, who will be discussing his recently published book, Local Experiences in Mining in Peru, and I can even do a little ad for it. The book is published by Routledge. Gerardo is currently an associate professor of anthropology at one of Peru's leading universities, which I always struggle to pronounce, but let's see how we go. Pontificia Universidad Católica del Peru, or PUCP, as it's more commonly known. Very importantly for today, he's also a graduate of University of Queensland, having completed a PhD here in 2015 under the supervision of myself and Professor Daniel Franks, who I understand is also in the audience today. Now, Gerardo's, the book he'll be talking about draws on and extends the research that he undertook for his doctorate, which he did with us. It's a fascinating and insightful study of the community living in the area around Rio Tinto's La Granja exploration project in the northern Peruvian Andes. And I'm sure he'll tell you more about that as his turn to speak. Like all good case studies, it's generated insights which have applicability well beyond that particular locality. Now, joining the session as commentators will be Professor Deanna Kemp, current Director of CSRM, who really needs no introduction in this context. I'm sure you'll know Deanna and the work that she does. And also Ms. Elizabeth Castro, who's President of the Australia-Peru Chamber of Commerce. Elizabeth's been a great supporter of building stronger links between Australia and Peru. She's also been a Peruvian consul in Sydney. And she's been very instrumental in the organisation and promotion of this webinar. And you'll be hearing from her shortly to tell us a little bit more about the work of the Chamber. Now, I have to say, one of CSRM's industry fellows, Sharon Flynn, who will be known to some of you, had also planned to participate in this webinar as a panellist. Sharon worked for Rio Tinto as the director of the La Granja social project between 2010 and 2014, so she would have been uniquely placed to comment on Gerardo's work. Unfortunately, due to a scheduling clash that was out of her control, Sharon is unable to join us today, but she sends her apologies, and to you in particular, Gerardo, her best wishes. Provided we keep to our timing, there will be an opportunity towards the end of the session for Gerardo to respond to questions and comments from the audience. So if during the course of his presentation or the discussion, you have some queries that you wish to put to Gerardo, please use the Q&A bottom at the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You'll type those in, and we'll either be able to put all of those questions to Gerardo, perhaps if time permits, and not a lot of questions. Otherwise, I'll do some curating and pick out those that I think are most pertinent. And just a heads up that the webinar will conclude at 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time sharp. So now, just before I hand over to Gerardo, I'd like to invite Elizabeth to just tell us a little bit about the Chamber and its role, and particularly in the context of the area of mining. So Elizabeth, over to you.
Thank you. I'm really delighted to participate in the launch of the book of Dr. Gerardo Castillo. Thank you, David Brereton, Emeritus Professor at SMI, for hosting this webinar, and to Professor Diana Kemp, Director of CSRM. So the Australia-Peru Chamber of Commerce here in Australia is alive, not only to support every Australian and Peruvian business to enter each other market in creative ways, but to promote collaborative and stronger sustainable practices and social awareness. Our aim is to support the government efforts to strengthen bilateral trade and investment and position ourselves as a strategic link between Australian and Peruvian business communities, advocating, promoting, organizing events, supporting business missions whenever it's possible again, and creating new partnerships with people and businesses on the ground. We'd love to invite companies and other organizations to join us in this effort. Collaboration between industry and academia is more vital than ever in this challenging environment. Peru has a mining tradition since pre-Columbian times. Mining continues to be important to the Peruvian economy. It represents 10% of GDP, 61% of exports, 16% of private investment, and 19% of taxes paid by companies. Australia's commercial and investment presence in Peru has grown over the last years with about 90 companies and an estimated 5 billion invested there. Australia is the 5th largest foreign investor in Peru's mining sector. Local experiences of mining in Peru is an extraordinary contribution to the design of corporate standards and practices and public policies. It helps us understand the transformation of Andean societies from the perspective and with the active intervention of local women and men, and activities, perceptions, and expectations of the families that go far beyond dynamics of social conflict. So this unique multidisciplinary approach provides invaluable tools for better understanding and for the integration of the society, and creates greater awareness about social responsibility, the relationship between corporations and rural population, and as Gerardo mentions in its book, facilitates understanding of the importance of corporate standards and practices in shaping social outcomes, and enriches the interaction between corporate and communities. Human and social dimensions continue to be essential. Stronger connection and dialogue between corporations and local communities, and the implementation of best industry practice based on research will only be mutually beneficial to build stronger engagement between Australia and Peru, and as a priority for us to achieve our goals and to make them a reality by 2030. We're looking forward to supporting further research in collaboration with the Sustainable Minerals Institute and CSRM, together with Peruvian universities and Australian and Peruvian companies and METs. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. So Gerardo, over to you. Take us to La Granja.
Thank you. Hello all. Well, good morning there, and good afternoon here in Lima. Actually, thanks everybody for joining us in this presentation, and a special thanks to Elizabeth, Diana, and David. Thank you for generosity, but also for your enthusiasm in organizing this event. And to be in a part of this new global mood, although in a digital way, it is, trust me, it's simply fantastic to be here again at the SMI, the place where the research we are presented materialize. However, I must recognize that despite the advantages of the digital platforms as Zoom, for example, I really miss the campus and, of course, the friends at UQ and Brisbane weather. I see many of you are wearing short sleeves, so I'm missing that. Actually, when I finished my doctoral dissertation, as David mentioned, in 2015 and returned to Peru, my home country, I thought that milestone of my academic life was completed. Unfortunately, I'm not sure, David Brereton and Daniel Franz, my advisors, proved I was wrong. Daniel stubbornly encouraged me to convert the dissertation into a book and enthusiastically support its publication. To both of you, many, many thanks. And instead of summarizing the book, what I would really like to do in this moment is to briefly introduce the context and the process where he emerged, and then more importantly, gave a space for the debate with David, Diana, and Elizabeth, and encourage you, all of you, to critically read the book and explore the research, and of course, to be part of this conversation. Indeed, more than a book of mining itself, this is a particular narrative and interpretation about the complex transformations that rural families experience and, at the same time, help to shape in the context of many vicissitudes for the exploitation of one of the largest copper deposits in the world for at least 20 years. For this purpose, I took advantage of a critical reading of the production of space, a conceptual frame developed by the French geographer Henri Lefebvre. In particular, I asked for the transformation that the families of La Granja, a small rural locality in Cajamarca, in the northern Andes of Peru, have experienced in relation with four central axes. First, access to land. Has the land been fragmented? Is it inherited? Is there a market for selling and buying land and properties? The second one, production, both agrarian and non-agrarian production. Are both growing? One of them diminishing? Why? The third is spatial mobility. Is people migrating more or not? Do people get more mobile in terms of spatial, but also in social terms? Do people use mixed patterns as a double residency? For example, having one house in the city while keeping rights in the rural areas? And finally, what's going on with representation of place that local people construct about their life in the past, in the present, and in the future in the village? In many senses, the book I'm presenting here crystallizes a series of processes and issues that have influenced me along 3 decades. Well, I'm getting old. Please, let me briefly sketch for you some of these processes, not as a mere anecdote or nostalgic remembrance, but to highlight some of the issues that emerge along the book. In the middle of the 90s, I worked at CEDEP-AYU, a regional NGO that promotes farming development among peasant communities in Cusco in southern Peruvian Andes. This experience taught me about the large transformations that an irrigation project could produce over the economic, social, morphological, and also gender spheres of those localities. Of course, these modernizing transformations were not linear, homogeneous, accumulative, nor intended all of them. My subsequent research on mining, continued trying to make sense of the transformation that modernizing and development projects contribute to unleash on regional spaces and societies in the country. My father was born in La Huaca, a small town in Piura, a small cotton town in this northern coast region of the country. When a child, I was captivated by his incredible stories about British cotton gins, American canned products, and European settlers that rambled through the arid landscape on the back of a mule. Those stories and images remained in me and nurtured an interest for understanding the complex flows at different scales that transform local realities into global ones and vice versa, the global escapes of Arjuna Padurai. Along my concerns on social change and spatial connections, there is my interest on historical depth, for explanation that allow to examine long wave, the Fernand Braudel Longue Durée, and the use of cyclic strategies a long time. Precisely, the notion of strategy leads up to the concept of agency, which in my opinion is central in the book. The possibility that, of course, acknowledging existing power relations and power imbalances, people could shape and make sense of their own lives. Among these strategies, the importance of the imaginaries, of the symbolic, stand out in their ability to crystallize and to shape, at the same time, our daily life actions. In addition, since initial positions, effects, and changes inside any society are never homogeneous, I regard essential to make explicit the implications of these social processes on gender relations and try to understand the study dynamics from diverse voices, including, of course, those from women. Many of these processes finally converge in La Granja case. I learned about this copper project in 2005 when, thanks to my colleagues Manuel Glave and Gerardo Damonte from the Peruvian think tank Grade, I was part of the research team in charge of analyzing the social and economic characteristics of the localities surrounding the operation of the British Australian mining company Rio Tinto. But the reason is sad, we are not having Sharon with us here. The gained familiarity with the case, plus the warm openness of many of the local families, were central for my election of La Granja as a research project for the doctoral studies I began in 2012 at the CSRM at UQ. However, in addition to these practicalities, the case itself poses particularities that make it extremely valuable for examination, in my opinion. To be sure, the fact that after more than 20 years of exploration and feasibility works, the mine have not been constructed yet is the main particularity, which is amazing. 20 years of work, 3 companies, and no mine yet. So we can regard, of course, this as a research weakness due to the difficulty to extrapolate results to another mining experiences in the country and around the world. However, I consider this fact extremely valuable because it allows to explore how large social and economic transformations can be triggered despite the lack of significant environmental change. I think that is central in the argument I'm making. In addition, a long process involving at least 3 mining companies, Cambior, BHP Billiton, and Rio Tinto, provides an advantage point to examine the outcomes of different corporate policies and practices. On the other hand, specialized literature, especially in Peru, from social science in the rural Andes and around natural resource development, in my opinion, have overemphasized studies related to social conflict and peasant communities. In the case of La Granja, there neither exists an open conflict, nor land is collectively held, but land belongs to individual families. Therefore, the case allows to explore local strategies beyond violence and within different land regimes. For the research, I conduct a 6-month fieldwork in 2013 as a multivocal and multi-site ethnography in order to deal, on the one hand, with the different voices and perspectives of this experience of social transformation, and on the other, with the geographical mobility that mining development implies. Therefore, I made participatory observation and interview in depth and followed 14 families through the family heads and their partners in 4 locations: the La Granja area, Querocoto, which is the district capital, Chiclayo, the main coastal city in the region, and Ojo de Toro, a rural coastal locality in Lambayeque region. In addition, I interview local leaders and qualified informants, company employees, and social scientists. No, I mentioned in this methodology, as you can see here in the map, no, that is part of the strategies that family use, no, to construct uh, a widespread migratory network, no, in territories that goes beyond even the national borders, for the circulation of people, goods, services, and ideas. I mention this because the methodology allows me to include in a single analysis different temporal and spatial scales, which I think is one of the main features in the research. No? Not looking simply as a static moment to see strategies developing a long time and also using different spatial scales. But I don't want to go further in and telling you the whole story. What I would like to do is to stop here to make a space for the idea from our panel and also to open the conversation with all of you. Thanks for the moment.
Thank you very much, Gerardo. That was a very succinct summary. Just before we'll go to Deanna and ask her for some comments, but I might just ask you a question or two first. In your book, and obviously in the thesis and in a couple of related articles since, you talk about the limitation of place-based approaches to understanding and dealing with the impacts of mining on communities, and obviously this in the context of what you focus on in the thesis about the mobility of people, their capacity to move around, to double residency, and so on. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because that's it's kind of quite a different way of thinking about impacts, where we tend to think that they're all happening there in the perimeter of where the development is.
Sure, thanks. I think that is a key and central point, and actually one of the issues that trigger part of my questions in the research. Sometime when I was at UQ, actually I discussed these issues a lot with Daniel. I think that social sciences working in mining is perhaps because of the consultancy issue has mimicked the environmental methodology, and I think that is, of course, that is a quite powerful methodology, but I think that is a limited and perhaps not only limited but a misleading figure that we can obtain of that. The environmental methodology tells us that there is an impact very well located in one location. For example, some elimination of some ingredients, some minerals, some fuel over some water deposits. No? And then you have a diffusion of those impacts, now in a very narrow territory. And I think that is a wrong impression that we have in the social sphere. What we have in the social sphere is not affecting territories. More importantly, what mining processes affect are networks and meanings. And people are very mobile. For instance, if you affect income, that could be an increase or a decrease of income of a local family, that could have effects of the education of the children. There are hundreds miles away from the mining locality. You can affect then relative and a series of kinship networks that goes beyond the local territory. I think that was something that made me think about all these mobile strategies that people use and the interwoven of networks in a very fluid way. For instance, one of the key strategies is to developing a double residency, to having one location in the city while keeping rights of property and land in the rural areas.
Gerardo, I know we're talking about mining, but it's very hard these days to have a discussion that doesn't loop back to the pandemic. But do you see those processes as also being important in Peru in terms of how people have responded to the pandemic?
Sure. I think in one sense, I don't want to generalize that this is a single factor explanation, but in one sense, we are experiencing now with the pandemic the deployment of one of these classic strategies. Generally, like actually many rural economies has studied this. When there is a national economic growth and more opportunities in the city, members of the families in rural areas move to the city seeking these opportunities. Vice versa, when there is a decline in these economic opportunities, they return. And now we are seeing a sharp decline in the urban opportunities, in a very dramatic way. The inability to people to get enough money and goods to eat. So in that reason, that is one of the cycles of goes back to rural areas. I think that is a very fluid strategy that have more or less in the last 400 years worked in many rural areas in Peru.
Okay, thank you. Diana, can I say to you and ask you to make a few comments or pose some questions to Gerardo? I know.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. David, do you want comments and questions or just a comment?
Start with your comments. I'm sure you can work it out. Start with your comments.
Okay. Well, thank you, Gerardo. It's just such a delight to listen to you again, and a huge congratulations on the book. I think we're all also proud. I wasn't on your advisory team, but I've taken, such an interest in your work over the years, and there's some great ongoing connections between CSRM and Peru. Because of you and others. So we feel very nostalgic about that connection. But revisiting your work also reminded me, as I had to prep for this, reminded me why your work is so interesting. And so what I thought I would do in my couple of minutes is just to share 5 things that I think sets your work apart. So I think the first one is that you position migration and mobility as natural and not an inconvenience, where the emphasis is on the resourcefulness and the agency of the families and not an issue to be managed, by mining because it's inconvenient. So that's the first thing I think that's you approach the topic so well. I think the second thing is that you're interested in broader social change patterns and mining in that context. So you put mining in the mix, you don't put mining at the center. And I think it's important for people to know that that's part of the character of your work. The third thing, I think, is that you tackle these big, broad patterns of flows of resources, both economic and human, through these really intimate family studies. So I hope my question is going to relate a little bit to your methodology and how you went from such a broad topic and a broad terrain to really, these very direct studies at the family level. The fourth thing is that you've got this really nice interplay between long histories and connections, but you also pose questions about the future. So we often forget to look back as we imagine and worry about what the future would look like. And I think in the context of the pandemic, that's a really helpful thing to be doing, to remember the history. And fifth, the role of women and how you've woven a gender analysis through your work without calling it a gender analysis. And the gender sensitivity energy really springs from the page, and it's something that I've always admired about your work. So collectively, I think those 5 things make your work pretty distinct and such an important contribution. And I hope that was a bit of a sales pitch for people to buy the book as well, because it's such, such interesting work. So they're my comments. It was such a pleasure to revisit all that, as I reminded myself about your body of work. And it's not just the book, it's 30 years, as you've said. So my question is, can you talk a little bit more about your typology of families? So you looked at 5 types of families: resistant, returnee, opportunistic, migrant, and regional. But why was this typology important for your work? Why was it important to work at a family level to understand these broad patterns? I think that would be super interesting for people to hear about. So
over to you, Gerardo. I'm just wondering if you could, just before getting that question, step back a bit and just talk a little bit about the general methodology, which I think you touched on only very lightly as you went through, which ends up as this family analysis. So maybe run those two aspects together.
Yeah, thanks, David.
Thank you. Thanks, actually, Diana, for that's a wonderful comment and your general reading of the work. Now, I think you have been extremely generous, highlighting and putting together these issues. I don't know how successful has been the mix, but indeed, I think that is one of the, and perhaps that will be the key to the window to jump into methodology. I think one kind of a very important notion, or more than a notion, that very important issue from an anthropological perspective is that the macro level, the macro issues are not flowing in the air, have to be experiences locally. That have to be experienced by people, and people will make sense of those experiences, of those structures. Because otherwise it will be very difficult to see, for example, change if everything is a structure. And definitely will be very difficult to see why people cares about things, around other peoples, about water, about images, about notions of mining, about notions of water, about notions of land, etc., etc. I think one of the key challenges in social science and social research, at least from an anthropological perspective, is to try to connect both global and structural issues, which actually are really important, with how are embodied and embedded in local experiences. And I think in that sense, I think, I'm not saying that this is a universal issue, but at least for rural areas like the Andean societies, family is a key unit for understanding this encounter of global, external, national, regional, corporate phenomena with individual decisions. Because I think many of the decisions regarding land, regarding another access, regarding the future of education of kids, etc., etc., decision about also limiting the autonomy of women, for instance, are taken in the family, in the nuclear and extended family. Also, many of the resources are, in terms of symbolic, but also very material, access to credit, access to labor, access to land services, are not taken in the formal market, are taken among the members of the family. And I think in that sense, family is in my opinion, a key device to understand these interconnections. So my methodology, in many senses, had tried to mix those kind of forces. That is one part of the story. I think family allows to see global and national decisions for instance, the Rio Tinto, or to put another example, that BHP Billiton decide to move out from the area and return to the land. No, actually, the way I look at that is not simply as a corporate decision that they have implication in the area, but through what are the specific strategies that local families use in that context. Some of them move back to the area as a whole family. Some of them move just some members, the elder, or the single mothers, or etc. Some of them didn't move back, bought the land and keep us as a secure asset, but it didn't move. And others have a very different opinion and thought that their life in the coast was forever. So my issue is that methodologically, family is the unit that allows to see these different scales. That is one part of the story. And in that sense, the typology was very helpful. You know? Because obviously social reality is never homogeneous. You know? So I decided to create a typology in the way that people relate to land. You know? So some people was, I call resistance, those people that that never wanted to sell the land to Cambior. You know? And they stand there. Actually, were only 7 families. You know? But they develop a discourse that thanks to them, the village remain. And they have more rights. They have a moral superiority to the other families. You know? Then I use another types as the opportunistics, you know, those people that were not from the area, but when they saw the economic local, the local economy burgeoning and rising, decide to move to the area. I think they developed a very different strategy. You know, for them, is the mining project goes on. There is nothing to lose. They don't have land and roots in the area. So that is kind of typology that to see different strategies, to see nuances in order to avoid this black and white and kind of very confrontational view, which is generally quite common. You know, local resistance versus I will not say attack, but disfranchising of the people. I think local people use very different strategies according to the assets, their local history, their personal views, their gender too. You know? In that sense, and perhaps with this, I should stop. You know, to give you one example, I found fascinating when local people start to talk about the past. Many of them, but especially the old men, tend to idealize the past. There was a kind of natural Arcadia where everybody lived in peace and the land was so productive. But then many women confronted that kind of Arcadia and paradise, and they recognized that there was a lot of poverty, but a lot of gender violence. They were not allowed to move out without permission of their husband or their parents. You know? So, and there was a lot of alcohol consumption and daily life violence. So as you can see, the social landscape is intertwined with this particular characteristic in the positioning of the individuals and the families. And I think that was for me, central part of my methodology to understand, to make sense of these changes.
Okay, thank you, Gerardo. I'm going to ask Elizabeth also to give her comments, and if you wish to pose you a question. Just before that, a reminder that that we do have some time at the end for questions from the audience. So, if there is something you'd like to ask Gerardo about, now's a good time to go into the Q&A function and put your question in there. So please do that if you're thinking about it. So Elizabeth, over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, David. Well, I'd like to reinforce the fact that this research really contained in this book should be part of the basic study material for all companies already operating and that are preparing in any way to be related to mining and resource extraction activities in Peru. Corporate, as we know, corporate social responsibility is key in Peruvian market. The book studies in depth. I would like to comment on some points. The in-depth study with very academic regard the concept of spatial transformations and how these spatial transformations prompted by mining development in Peru have characteristics that are unique and different from the ones that occur in the north or rural global north. Also, and how from a theoretical and from a first-hand experience, the book highlights, as Gerardo puts it, the importance of understanding the day-to-day life experience of local families and how transformation is not an automatic outcome mechanically derived from global forces, and shows this that these unique strategies used by the local families mediate global processes and are able to shape, speed, and direct the changes in a unique way. And how this new order, that starts, as Gerardo mentioned, even before environmental actions occur, as in the case of La Granja, is characterized by a combination of traditional social structures, elements from the Western model of the state, organizations and movements, reacting globalizing forces. So it shows the different cultural approaches and how important social bonds and kinship networks are to the reproduction of the social and economic life of rural Andean families. As Diana mentioned, the book also gives light to the study of these transformations and tensions that the mining and the extractive resources activities produce concerning gender relations. So the challenges for women and indigenous communities around mining sites, incorporating the voices and experiences of indigenous women in both Australia and Peru. For example, this is a theme that the Chamber is starting to work as well. We are very, very interested in a collaborative project with indigenous women in mining and resources, Australia, WIMBRA, and women in mining in Peru, and the support from academia and industry, that's going to be invaluable. For this and for really the book is an invaluable contribution to the mining industry. And it will be also, it is a contribution to understand how this pandemic is affecting the perception and expectation of the communities around the sites. Because this will require more active and solid relationships with the population around operations. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Gerardo, any comments in response?
Yeah, maybe perhaps just quite brief in order to give time to open the discussion and open the room. But both Diana and Elizabeth had mentioned the fluidity, and we have talked about this. But another aspect that I would like to highlight, and also regarding what Elizabeth was mentioned in her comments, is that land, despite all the changes that we are experiences, land continue to be the locus of the disputes, continue having a central value for local families. However, there is something new under the sun. Land has changed from a use value, so like producing land for farming, as to exchange value. So land itself, for example, is any longer farmed in the same way. The value of the land now recedes as a commodity to exchange and negotiate vis-a-vis with mining companies. And I think that is really, really interesting because move us from the environmental, well, I'm not saying that it's not important, but move us from environmental consideration into another strategies that people use in order to remain that land as an asset, to negotiate thanks to kinship and thanks to another strategies with companies in the case the projects will start operations. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Gerardo, and thanks, Elizabeth. We have a question now from, this is a bit like an old supervision session, Gerardo, because it's from Daniel Franks. And Daniel has asked, firstly, have you returned to Granja now 5 years on, and have you witnessed any further change? And I might say to that, if you haven't, what you heard about what's happening there? And the second question is, I'll just read it out. Could I ask you to picture a future where the mine does now proceed and the physical and environmental changes that you've noted have been missing to date actualise? Do you expect that the long delay would position La Granja differently to mines where the physical changes start earlier? That's a very interesting question. So the first is, and I can repeat the second when you get to it, the first is, have you been back to La Granja? And if not, what do you know about what's happened there in the interim? Because I think my recollection is when you're at La Granja, it was all go ahead. Everyone was assuming there was going to be a mine, and then suddenly it stopped and it went backwards. And how things have changed. Then I'll come to the second question.
Thanks, Daniel. Well, that is a tough question to forecast the future. I think we are social science really bad looking the future. We always get wrong. We are really
asking you to not forecast the future, but to say what's sorry.
No worries.
The incompetent facilitator forgot to turn off his phone. Sorry about that. Sorry. No, the first thing is what's happened. I mean, your field work was done, I think, in 2014. Has anything changed, or have you been back there? Do you know of anything? And then
yeah, well, as is a kind of like quite common among anthropologists doing relatively long field work, I developed personal links with the locality. And actually now I'm the godfather of a little girl in La Granja, one of the family that hosts me. So I'm still in touch with some of the families. And actually I returned for the baptism of the girl some years ago. And definitely there are changes. Because many of them know that the project was put on hold in 2014 or 2013, I'm not wrong. But Rio Tinto asked permission to the government to keep the license for future exploration and feasibility work while waiting new global conditions. Of course, what happened is that in one sense that version and that activity, to give you an example, from 7 houses when in the peak of the field work, from having 7 houses that remain after the Cambior land purchase, in the peak of the field work were around 170 houses built in the area. Many of them simply with the purpose not to be occupied by new families, but simply with the purpose to be sold to the project, to the company. So from that, obviously the activity have decreased substantially, but not to the levels prior to the project. I think people, after three ups and downs in the project, I think there is a lot of pessimism, but the people have also learned, in my opinion, that a new event, a new wave could happen soon. So people have not stopped to having properties there. So the bus routes continue. Many of the family are keeping this double residence, and business are still relatively vivid in the area, comparing with those when I went and for the first time in early 2000. Now, in my opinion, it's like people have learned, that company can return to the original project.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe related with the second question, I stop there. That makes quite different, in my opinion, that poses some differences with La Granja with other projects. So the people have build a strong network and strong strategies, a lot of businesses. So they and that will be quite different to mines with physical changes start early and build the mine. You have 20 years, at least 10 years of people making businesses with the company. So, and actually one of the strategies that the people have developed is to try to prolong this period. Continue making businesses without selling the land. So yes, I think, Daniel, that I think La Granja is a special case, is different to others, but kind of like a reflecting mirror could give us some keys of one of the differences with another experiences.
Okay, thanks very much, Gerardo. And look, maybe on that, a feature of La Granja is there hasn't been the intensity of conflict that you've seen around some other developments in the Cajamarca area, obviously, such as Conga, or you go down south to Las Bambas or the Tia Maria and so on. Is that simply a function of the timing and delay, or is there also something different about that area and those other mines and how those other mines were developed? I mean, it's conflict, but the level of conflict around La Granja is much less, much more mediated than elsewhere. So a quick answer to that, actually, because I have another question that's come in.
That is a challenge to have a quick answer.
I think the essentially difficult question about Peru.
Of course, just some ideas. I don't have a definitive answer, of course, about that. I think first we have to remember when the first resettlement plan, when people was expelled by Cambior, that was a very tough time with the authoritarian Fujimori regime. So it was very difficult for people to make an open defense. Many of the leaders were accused of terrorism. So there was a time weak institutions, weak local organizations, and a state trying to impose investment projects. I think that is something key. What at the beginning there wasn't very obviously there were individual resistance, and some of the people suicide, but it were not collective resistance. Well, I think that is the context of militarization of those years. One thing. The second one is that we have to understand that corporate policies are really important. And I think I'm not idealizing, but I think Rio Tinto has been able to manage and to implement very proactive policies, including, for instance, the creation of a local employment for women. So actually, that's disencourage open conflicts. What you have is a kind more like a soft resistance in like a bargaining process instead of an open conflict. I think that could be some of the explanations.
Thank you, Gerardo. I asked you a challenging question, which is impossible time. We do have one more question, which I like to read out from Augusto Carti. So Augusto, I say hello from here. I look forward to seeing you again in person sometime. And Augusto's question is, Augusto is based in Lima, obviously. In regards to lands of communities in mining areas, usually a transactional approach has been taken and it results in a complex issue because of the time to negotiate. Depends on advancements of the projects and reserves known in the area, amongst others. So the uncertainty around where you're going, what land you need. And the experience of relocations have involved other conflicts. So his question is, building on your research, what could be a realistic approach in rural areas in terms of obtaining land permits, which usually are deemed to be the social license for continuing the project? So it's really getting at the essence of, what is a practical lesson out of this about how do you manage that complex process of land purchases to build that, whether it's a social license or at least to avoid conflicts.
Well, that is a super valid question. If I have the answer, well, I will sell like for $1 million to mining companies.
Anyway, your thoughts on that very quickly.
My thoughts on that. Perhaps like starting from a very grim experience. What happened with Cambior? With people who was expelled, they were forced to sell the land, and without any support, not from the government. Actually, the government shut down the local school and the health office. No, they push people out of the area without very little technical and social support. Many of them put some businesses, for example, but some of them bought trucks, and in only 2 months there were not only run of money, but it was a huge disaster. The people were not able, for example, to cultivate in very different agrarian systems, like in the coast, totally different, the rice system. So I think one of the key issues, and in one sense, Rio Tinto tried to do the opposite, not only providing support, technical and social support, but also, and I think that is one key element, to building a feasible future, a feasible dream. So the people have, that was the thing that people were really was fearing, and in one sense, sorry, a piece off. They were wanting some of them like, we want to sell the land, and we want just to move. We want to open a new future with our family in Chiclayo. And it's uncertainty. The managing of uncertainty is clear, in my opinion. No? Okay. And opposite what happened in Cambior with a huge uncertainty, a huge risk. The second, we're trying to manage that and to build affordable future.
Okay, thank you very much, Gerardo. We're now at the end of the webinar. So firstly, thanks, Gerardo, for participating and leading the discussion. It was fascinating. I love your energy and enthusiasm about your topic, and it's very important work that you're talking about. Thanks also to our panelists, Elizabeth and Deanna, for their insightful comments. And thanks also to Dillian and Rick at SMI for holding the whole show together on the technical side. I just wanted to end, and it's only take 30 seconds. I know we're over time, but I did see from our list we have quite a lot of people in on the webinar from Peru, and that's fantastic. Just wanted to say to you, look, we think that things have been pretty tough in Australia these last few months with the pandemic, but we know that it's been nothing compared to the challenges that your country and your neighbours have faced in dealing with the pandemic and its consequences. So I just want to let you know absolutely from the bottom of my heart, and I'm sure of others, that our thoughts and our best wishes are with you. And with that, I'd like to close the webinar. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Gerardo.
Thank you. Thank you, Gerardo.
Thanks. Thanks, all of you. Thanks for your generous comments. To see you, Diana, Elizabeth, David, and to see at least the names and the people in the room is simply fantastic. But moreover, one thing is really astonishing is to see how a research on mining can bring all of us together in a room to think about scales, about future, and about where people really cares. Thanks for all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gerardo.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.